Special Governing Board Meeting of the Jefferson Elementary School District at 7:02. Can we please have the call to, members present?
Hans Hansen. Rebecca Douglas.
Here.
Marie Brizuela.
Here.
Joseph Otaide.
Here.
Shaquille Ali.
Here. And I actually will ask Ms. Hopkins to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Great. Can we get a motion to approve the agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
Second. Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Board study session, moving way too fast. Administrative appointment for 2013-2014.
Yes, so we have here Ms. Leah Castro, or Eleanor Castro is her full name. She's being recommended to be the principal of Thomas Edison School and was interviewed by community members and staff members and was their top choice. And certainly when she proceeded to my office, she was also my top choice. So we're all in agreement here that she's a great match for Thomas Edison School.
All right. You have anything to say?
No. I
All right.
could make the motion that we approve the administrative appointment of Eleanor Castro as principal of Thomas Edison School, effective August 5, 2013. Do I need to give all the details?
No, that's fine.
I think you should.
Very well. For 208 workdays, step one, with a salary of $87,580 plus $1,100 for a master's degree.
Do we have a second?
With a resounding voice, a second.
Sounds good. All those in favor?
Aye.
All right, it's unanimous.
So at this point, I'd like to invite Ms. Castro, if you would like to come forward and just say a few words to our board.
Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm going to read a quick quote. He who goes out weeping, bearing the sowed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him. So that reminds me of communities and generations and families who have worked tirelessly for children here in Daly City and all over the world, and people who have worked for me. I grew up in poverty, and my teachers and my parents and my grandparents and generations before them have all held me up and all the other students up. So I'm so excited. I cannot wait to meet the staff and the students of Thomas Edison Elementary School, and this encapsulates how I feel for tomorrow and in continuing this hard work of educating our children. We were like those who dream, then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. So thank you. Really appreciate the opportunity.
All right, thanks. Yes.
I'm really excited about Ms. Castro joining us. She just has, besides her experience working and supporting families, parents, students, the whole kind of school communities she's worked in, she also has a lot of knowledge about the kind of programs and strategies we've been using in our district. So as she comes in, I think she'll be quickly up to speed on how we go about doing things in our district.
All right, that's good. Any other comments?
Welcome
All right.
aboard.
Welcome.
From my side, it's nice to see that our community takes leadership positions and moving up as I always say, give the ladders of opportunity to the next generation. And was it not for the teachers and the people that I had around me growing up in a tough neighborhood in San Francisco, it wouldn't get me to where we are today. And we would just want to extend those ladders, not to get to where we are, but far and beyond to the stars, that they could reach those, have reached their dreams and their goals. So thank you very much.
All right, thanks. All right, so now we'll have board study session on the Brown Act. And I'm not sure if you want to stay around for that.
You're welcome to stay around, Ms. Castro. You may also go have a nice celebration dinner. Yes, and so Mr. Tim Fox here from the County Council's office is here to provide a brief workshop to our board on the Brown Act, and it will, like our other previous meetings, will be on our website to be viewed by other board members and staff members who are not able to be here today. So, Mr. Fox, I invite you. Would you prefer to stand at the podium, or would you like to sit up here in the empty seat?
Oh, thank you for the invitation. I think the podium would probably be best for me to be able to see who's got questions and
Yeah, that's perfect.
how to answer them. Good evening, members of the board. As the superintendent said, my name is Tim Fox. I'm a deputy in the County Council's office, and we are the agency that provides legal services to your school district as well as most of the school districts in the county. And our job essentially is to assist the staff and the various school boards and other government agencies in San Mateo County with matters of governance and matters of compliance with the law. So it's my job to advise you before you make a decision, and then after you make a decision, it's my job to defend that decision against anyone who wishes to challenge it. And we do a lot of that work in San Mateo County, as I said, for most of the school districts. I personally have been a school deputy for the entire time I've been in the County Council's office, which is now going on, I think, almost 9 years, and have had a number of interactions relating to the Brown Act, not specifically with your district, but advising boards on best practices for compliance with the Brown Act, and then on a as-needed basis, answering questions as they come up, sometimes even on an emergency basis, to help boards do their best to comply with this rather significant law that governs a good deal of the board's business. So that's what we're here to talk about tonight. I have a handout for you, but because my wife is a teacher, I have learned not to give the handout to people until after I've finished talking.
Smart.
In addition to that, I spilled water on your copies of the handout on my way here, so I'm going to get this to you by other means. You may actually be familiar with it already. It's part of a presentation that our office gives to new school board members as an orientation when they first take office. So I know that as people review it and use it as a resource, as a reference, there are sometimes questions that pop up, so I'll do my best to sort of walk through the major issues, and then we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions about issues that have come up in your own representation of the public here in the Jefferson Elementary School District. So first of all, let's talk about what is the Brown Act. It's a buzzword. It's one of the few laws in California that almost everybody knows the name of. Members of the public know that there's a Brown Act, and they have a good idea in some cases, in other cases a vague idea about what it requires. In general, it gets listed by a member of the public when they're wishing to communicate with you that they are distressed. They will call something a Brown Act violation when what they're really trying to say is that they think that you made the wrong decision. So it's not always a matter of actual violations of the Brown Act, it's just the vocab word that's known out there in the public as a way to communicate that they think that something wrong was done and that they would like it reversed and corrected. But it does have specific requirements, and it is a significant matter for the board to understand what the ground rules are. It's been the law for a long time. California first adopted the Brown Act in the early 1960s. It was part of a package of good governance reform legislation that overtook Sacramento in the early 60s. When it started out, it was fairly simple. It was simply a law that required that meetings occur in public. And then over time, it has evolved and been added to by subsequent legislation and amendments to essentially begin to prohibit practices that allowed people to have their meetings in private. So the Brown Act has essentially two components. One is a commandment, thou shalt meet in public, and then the other is a prohibition, thou shalt not meet in private. And it seems that those are two rather simple concepts, but as I'm sure you learn very quickly on a school board, things can sometimes get a little bit murky about what that really requires. What is a public meeting as opposed to a private meeting. And I don't know that members of the public who haven't yet served in public office can really understand exactly how difficult some of those distinctions can be. And since the law is a law that favors transparency, often the person that's asserting that there's been a violation of the Brown Act claims the moral high ground and says, you're not being transparent, you didn't conduct your business in the open, sunshine is the best disinfectant, and you should be doing this in public. And sometimes that's right, and other times there are good policy reasons why an exception to the Brown Act or other transparency law might potentially apply. So I'm going to cover the following 6 basic areas. And I know that we've got 90 minutes reserved for this, but if things are easy to understand and simple, it'll be a lot shorter than that. So I'm happy to end as quickly as you believe is appropriate given the topic. The first topic is what types of public groups are covered by the Brown Act. The second topic is what is a meeting. The third is what are the notice and agenda requirements of the Brown Act. The fourth is what are the public's rights. The fifth, when are closed sessions permissible? And the sixth, what are the consequences of violating the Brown Act? And in addition to giving you that overview of the 6 basic areas and moving through them methodically, I've come to realize that, as with a lot of matters of compliance with state law, compliance with the Brown Act is subject to the 5 stages of grief that were talked about in, I think, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work in sociology. And the 5 stages of grief are as follows. First, denial. The first stage of grief is that I'm going to tell you what the law is, and your instincts will cry out against it and say, that can't possibly be right. And you will go through a stage of denial at each point when I tell you what the Brown Act requires. The second stage is depression. You will feel a sense of depression as you understand how complicated this can be. The third stage is bargaining. Now, you wouldn't think that bargaining would be a stage of grief about understanding the law, but when it comes to transparency, your thought will be very practical. It will be, I guarantee, isn't there a simpler way to do this? What if we did X instead of the thing that the Brown Act specifically requires? Because X is better. More people will know about our business if we do it that way. But I'm here to tell you, you'll have to move to another stage of grief. Anger. Anger will be the next stage, and you'll have to get over that. And finally, the last stage of grief is acceptance. And I hope that by the end of my presentation, and as you gain a fuller understanding of what the law requires, that you'll get to acceptance and begin to understand why compliance is actually, though not easy, and sometimes prevents you from doing things that are entirely sensible, that compliance is still your best option when it comes to the Brown Act. And we work with school boards to create the most flexibility that we can about practical solutions to Brown Act problems, but in the end, the goal is technical compliance. So, first topic, what types of public groups are covered by the Brown Act? The Brown Act applies to legislative local agencies. There's another law that applies to state government, but when you're talking about local government, local agencies have to comply with the Brown Act. Very simple answer is your board is subject to the Brown Act. The City Council of Daly City is subject to the Brown Act. Boards that are created by you by appointing them are in many cases subject to the Brown Act. Your Bond Oversight Committee, for example, is subject to the Brown Act. Many of your subcommittees created by you are subject to the Brown Act. That is a topic we will have to go into in greater detail because there is an exception, but you have to meet all the qualifications for the exception before the Brown Act stops applying. Your school site councils, to the extent that you have them, do not have to comply with the Brown Act. And the reason why is there's a special education code section that governs school site councils that provides for a very specific limited form of transparency that they're required to follow. So it doesn't have quite the same prohibition on private meetings. Your school site council members can talk about business in a slightly different way. I would consider it basically Brown Act light. It has to be transparent in the way that complies with the education code, but they don't need to do specifically all the things that you do. But it's a helpful rule of thumb to assume that all legislative bodies of your district, one way or another, advisory or otherwise, start with a presumption that they have to comply with the Brown Act until we can find a reason why they don't have to. But you shouldn't start with the assumption that, darn it, this business is going to be very difficult to conduct if we do it as a board because we have to do it in public. If we delegate it to another agency, another sub-body of us, or a mix of members of the public and board members working together on a new committee structure, that the Brown Act wouldn't apply to that, because there's a chance that it does. And you would need to work fairly carefully with the superintendent and with our office to find a specific reason why it wouldn't. It does not apply to individual decision makers. So the superintendent does not need to post an agenda outside his office every time he's meeting with someone. The superintendent can also unilaterally create a committee of advice, cabinet, or even interested stakeholders, including a mix of community members and staff members and even a few board members, so long as it's the superintendent's advisory committee that he has appointed. To the extent the board itself begins selecting who amongst their members are part of that committee, then it creates a risk that there's an argument that it's actually a board subcommittee, and therefore the Brown Act applies. So think of it this way: if the authority is flowing downward from you, the Brown Act probably will need to be complied with. If the authority is flowing down from the superintendent and not coming up to you, then it's possible that the Brown Act won't apply. There is a specific exception for ad hoc advisory subcommittees consisting solely of less than a quorum of the legislative body. Okay, so once I've said every time you appoint a committee, you've got to follow the Brown Act, now this is the loophole that you can drive a truck through. But you have to drive the truck very carefully through this loophole. There are three elements to this. Ad hoc, okay? Ad hoc, Latin for a thing. Done for a thing. It's done for a specific purpose, and it's done for a limited scope and a limited period of time. It's basically the opposite of a standing subcommittee. So if you find yourself thinking that we should appoint a standing subcommittee to deal with whatever issues crop up in this realm, then you can't rely upon the Brown Act exception. The second element is that it has to be advisory. So you can't delegate your authority to a subcommittee to say, why don't you go and take action on this? But you can tell a subcommittee of yourselves to study something and to report back with a recommendation. And that's an advisory subcommittee because it's not the end of the story until all of you get to vote on it in a public meeting. Consisting of solely of less than a quorum of the legislative body. Okay, so this is a bit of an ambiguity in the statute. I don't think the legislature quite anticipated the frequency with which school boards would feel the need to appoint a 2-by-2 committee consisting of 2 members of the school board and 2 members of some other agency with which the school board regularly interacts. A number of school boards have found it beneficial to appoint a standing subcommittee for, say, relations with the city. And so there are 2 members of the school board and 2 members of the city council that might regularly meet. We advise that the best way to make that legal under the Brown Act is to not say that you're appointing 4 members of a committee, 2 of the school board and 2 of the city, because you're not. You don't get to choose who the city representatives are, for example. What you're really doing is appointing a subcommittee of your board, which consists solely of those 2 members. And then if they hold a meeting, it's not subject to the Brown Act, even if there are city council members who attend. And the city council essentially does the same thing. They appoint 2 members of their own. So it's not a committee of 4, it's a committee of 2 that then has a meeting with 2 members of the city council. So that's the best way to deal with that particular troubling issue. But what you should probably not do, as a matter of practice, is to have a standing committee on a particular topic in the hopes that those 2 members could meet regularly about an issue of longer, larger concern. So you could not have a budget subcommittee of the board that would regularly meet solely for the purpose of establishing the annual budget. But what you could have is an ad hoc advisory subcommittee to report back with recommendations for the 2014-2015 school year's budget, because that is a matter of limited scope with a specific time frame, and it's ideal if by its action creating that subcommittee, the school board were to say, with a report back by such and such date. because then that says, at that moment in time, the subcommittee has completed its work and it's over, and it bolsters the support for a conclusion that it is, that you've been successful in creating an ad hoc advisory subcommittee consisting solely of 2 members of the board. Now, finally, consisting solely of 2 members of the board. It is, in this day and age, quite popular for school boards to try to generate community involvement and get community input by creating subcommittees that consist of a mix of people. So you would have 2 school board members and 2 community members and maybe 2 school site members and maybe 2 members of district staff, and you would say, that's the committee. We've appointed this committee. Once you've appointed anyone other than the 2 members of the school board, it no longer consists, it's no longer a subcommittee of the board, it's just a committee. It's not a subcommittee of the board because it's more than just the 2 members. And at that point, you're potentially creating an argument that the exception doesn't apply, because if those people were all to meet together in a room with some kind of delegated authority of the school board, I don't have an exception in the Brown Act that I could point to that would say that they don't need to post an agenda and follow all the rules that I'm about to describe.
Just out of curiosity, but weren't you saying that isn't one of the main pretenses of the Brown Act is that it has to be at least a quorum? So doesn't that exempt it under less than for us, it would be less than 3, basically 2 and under, that it would not be under the...
You would not be then conducting an illegal meeting of the school board, because you're right, a quorum isn't present at that time. But if a quorum of the subcommittee appointed by the board is present, then it's a meeting of that subcommittee. And if Brown Act compliance flows down through the board, the Brown Act would apply to that subcommittee because you appointed all the members. So there are ways to successfully accomplish...
Can you say that again? So, okay, so if it's... No, seriously, right? So a standing committee is, so the five board members appoint less than a quorum, which would be 2 people of the subcommittee, right?
Right.
Okay. So if those 2 people get together...
Right. They can do that.
That's
fine.
Brown Act.
If those 2 people get together, oh, I'm sorry, you said a standing committee.
Yeah.
If the board appointed 2 members to meet on a topic of general interest with unlimited scope in time, it's potentially not exempt from the Brown Act. Those 2 board members, if they met, would have to post an agenda because the board created the subcommittee. If it was just a meeting of 2 board members that chose to get together without any board action, the Brown Act would not apply to it. I think I understand your question more fully now, and let me try to explain it this way. Right now, I'm talking solely about bodies that are created by official action of this board. And if the board acts to create a new body of any kind, there's only one exception that would say that that body doesn't need to comply with the Brown Act, and that is when it is an ad hoc advisory subcommittee consisting solely of 2 members of the board. But you're absolutely right, the 2 members of the board, if they go out, if 2 of you were to walk out that door and go to the parking lot and proceed to talk to each other about board business, that would not be a violation of the Brown Act because there was no action by the board to create it.
But if there's action made by the board...
It's a problem.
Okay, so... Thinking of it again. The board creates a ad hoc committee for 2 people. Those 2 people meet. That's under Brown Act.
The board creates an ad hoc subcommittee of 2 of its members. Those 2 people meet. They have complied with the Brown Act because they're not subject to the requirements of posting an agenda and inviting the public. Perfectly legal.
Okay. So...
It's when you add more people.
It's if the board's action added more people to that group, correct.
Or if it's
board's
ongoing, open-ended. Because that would then not be ad hoc.
Yes, that's correct. That would be another way you could potentially create a problem. Now, it would not be illegal for those 2 board members who were appointed to an ad hoc advisory subcommittee and the board took action to appoint only those 2 people to say, we're supposed to study the 2013-2014 budget and we can't make any progress unless we've got staff members present. So we want the superintendent to be there and the chief business official to be there and maybe some other people as well, maybe some interested people from the community as well. At that point, they're still complying with the Brown Act, even though there are other people present in the room. I don't mean to say that every time two members of the board meet together in a room when appointed by official action that they have to exclude everybody else. They're complying with the Brown Act at that point if they are going forward with their, but it's only if they're the only two members of the committee. If the board itself were to say, but we want this prominent citizen from our community to be on the committee as well, then the board is taking action to enlarge the subcommittee to more than just the exception under the Brown Act.
Got it. So I guess what I'm trying to figure out is that we could think of all the variations and the derivatives of what can happen with a committee, but at 7:16 p.m., the goal of the Brown Act is to hit the technical compliance, meaning that as long as there's less than 2 people on the board, it is not subject to the Brown Act, correct?
There are a couple other.
And again, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
So, yeah, you're absolutely right that what I'm arguing for is that technical compliance is the only complete defense. The best kind of correct is technically correct in my line of work.
And then basically, you're right. This is the law.
Yeah.
These are the things that weren't, and that's what I'm trying to figure out right now.
And I believe you're in the stage of grief of bargaining right now, because what you're essentially saying is there are a number of things that we could do that would be better than complying with the Brown Act, because it would involve more community involvement and would be, it would be like Brown Act plus, because we could, meet in this particular way that was going to be even better than what's required by the rules. But the Brown Act requires that the business be conducted in a particular, predictable way, and there are incentives built into the law to require that it be done only in that particular way, even if there is a better way. And I'll get to that in a moment about things like teleconferences, because there are a billion things that are smarter than the Brown Act about how to conduct a public meeting. But unfortunately, the law has never been adjusted to reflect that. Yes?
So just, I've asked this question before, and I've gotten a response, but I just want to hear again here. To reflect our working structure, I have, or the district has, some subcommittees. None of them meet regularly, so to speak, on the first such and such of such and a month. They meet as needed, as I need advice. And I do have, or members of my cabinet have, board members who are representatives on that committee to provide advice or feedback on whatever initiative might be coming. They don't take any formal action. All formal action is taken here. The board does approve my recommendations for members to be present on the subcommittees. So how does that work? I mean, so should they not approve that? Should I just announce it to them and say, here's who's going to be on it? Is that?
It would be my recommendation that when you propose to hold a meeting of a superintendent's advisory subcommittee, that you merely inform the board that it's your intention to meet with the following 2 people, and then if those people object and say, I don't want to do it, then at least you've learned that those people won't be showing up to the meeting. But asking the board to take some kind of action to say, yes, those are the right 2 people to give you advice for purposes of the superintendent's advisory committee is probably not wise, because it creates an ambiguity about whose committee it really is. If what you're essentially doing is saying, I don't want to bring a matter of business before the board that's doomed to failure because everybody opposes it, and I want to have 2 board members that say, here's what we suggest that you do, and we will support it, that's totally okay, but that's supposed to be for your benefit rather than for the board's benefit. It'll ultimately be for the board's benefit to have a recommendation that can be adopted, but it is your advisory committee at that point. It's supposed to be to advise you about what to propose, as opposed to being 2 board members telling you what they would like to see done and then brought back to the board.
And so all of the agendas are generated by me or my cabinet. They're not board member agendas.
Which is a good fact. It's just that to eliminate any ambiguity about whether it's board down or superintendent up, I would prefer the most number of facts showing that it's the board, it's the superintendent up.
Okay.
Yeah, can you go over that whole section again? I think that's where a lot of tension is happening. So can you basically redo that whole thing and
Okay.
basically,
Well, can we actually be concrete about,
yeah, that's exactly, so,
you know, I'm thinking, for example, we have the
Let's check the
curriculum and
curriculum
instruction. We have two
instruction.
members of the board who meet randomly with our curriculum and instruction director, basically to get information for us to bring to the board.
Right.
So
But we don't
you could
always
say
get
then
the
that the
information.
two board members are the only committee members, and we've gone to Sandy for the input we need to bring information. And would that,
If the two members of that subcommittee were appointed by the board, say, at its annual organizational meeting in December, as is often the case,
That's right.
and it was voted upon by the board as to which two people would be the representatives, you've created a difficult argument for me to make that it is now an ad hoc advisory subcommittee consisting solely of two members of the board. If there's a specific project that's being undertaken, it's better. It's better, rather than have a topic area to say, we're rewriting the district's board policies, but we can't do that with 5 members, and what we'd really like is for 2 people to work on it really hard and then say, here's the package that we recommend, and to say, we want you to bring it back in July. That's better, as opposed to saying, this is the standing subcommittee on bylaws.
and then this is our decision. You can't do that.
Right.
So basically, standing committee can bring a recommendation to the board that has to be approved by the board, but cannot make a decision
No, they can make.
on their
Can't be a
own.
standing committee at all
Right.
unless they post an agenda and invite the public to attend the
the
meeting.
actual
Right.
problem is that annual reorganization and ticking off who takes which responsibilities.
Yes.
Okay. What about something like, I mean, I'm thinking the one thing that doesn't kind of fit that structure where we've got 1 or 2 board members who are just getting feedback is that the district has a wellness committee, and we have 1 board member who sits on it. The committee, of course, has no, authority. It's an advisory committee, but we do send a board member to sit on that committee.
I guess,
And it's 1, not 2, so
Right.
that's a different numerical thing here. I'm wondering how those numbers apply.
I would have to look at whether or not it's really the board pushing downward, or whether that's really a matter of the staff collecting a group of people, which includes 1 board member, pushing upward.
It feels a great deal more like the other, but we have traditionally made that designation.
Right.
So it sounds like the thing
Well,
we
we
need.
only
It's
had
a
the wellness
distinct-
for a couple of years.
Right.
It's a distinction that would be fact-specific, and I, again, would want a pile of facts to show that when that committee meets, it's done kind of to allow staff to make a particular recommendation to the board and say, this has already been vetted by the wellness committee, and it has their blessing, and therefore you should take action on it. Rather than say, this is the board's subcommittee on wellness, which consists of 1 board member and a bunch of other community people that we have appointed by action.
Yeah, we haven't appointed any of them.
Yeah, so that would be the best fact, is that you haven't appointed the other members. In that case, it's not really your subcommittee.
Right.
You've said who your representative shall be, but you didn't appoint the other members, so
So that
it's a
would-
stronger argument for me that it's not
That would
your
actually be a
subcommittee.
different kind, which is what it feels like, is it's a different kind of committee.
Yes.
And,
Until
It's
you
a-
find
it's
something
a district
wrong.
committee, not a board subcommittee.
right.
So would you recommend that the superintendent ask for ad hoc committees as the need appears for each, whatever the case may be, instead of every year us coming up with any type of scenario of how we're voting on like 5 committees, 6, 7 committees?
I think this is one area where my answer is a regretful yes, it would be better to do it that way. And I understand fully that it sometimes makes more sense to say to board members, this is a matter of your expertise, this is a matter of your traditional interest,
Right.
it's your baby. You've done it for a long time and you like to do it. And so therefore, we allocate it, and it's a matter of work sharing. So it would be a more practical governance solution to allow that type of thing. but the Brown Act's exceptions are the Brown Act's exceptions, and I guess what the legislature is essentially saying, have as many standing committees as you like, but post an agenda and invite the public.
So-
That's, of course, the other side of it, is we could simply post the agenda and invite
Right.
the public.
No
So-
one's gonna really come, but
Which
at least
wouldn't
you're
actually
doing the right
change
thing.
anything.
Yeah.
So just once again, these touch points that we've been talking about over time, is it safe to say, to be in compliance with the Brown Act, standing committees must post an agenda?
Yes, that is correct.
So basically, were we in violation of the Brown Act because we did not post agenda to standing committees?
But doesn't that depend on
They're,
the
but they're
other-
superintendent committees.
Right,
So,
so,
I mean, that's where I
So
think I'd
that's
like
where,
to, I'd
I
like
mean,
to
if they're
sit down
standing
with
committees
county
and
council.
that's where the tension is happening. What, are we in violation of Brown Act, or are we not in the violation
well,
of
I
Brown
don't
Act?
have any tension
I-
around that. Before you even go into that, I think that the real issue is that there's a difference between a standing committee and an ad hoc committee, and then there's an issue of if the authority is coming from the board down or from the superintendent up with approval from the board.
Right. I think it's difficult for me, shooting from the hip, to give an opinion about a past practice of the district. I am much better at advising what to do going forward.
Right.
So
rather-
I guess that's what I'm
Right,
saying. So
because
so
it-
for future movement, and in order to avoid any type of lawsuit in violation of the Brown Act,
Correct.
is it safe to say that our standing committees must post an agenda and allow it to be public?
Right.
It is the
That was
board's
my answer.
option whether to
do that.
appoint standing committees with the understanding that those committees will need to post an agenda, or instead rely upon this other procedure of limiting the scope and duration of the committee in such a way that they could meet in private if they wanted to.
Okay, I'd like to throw something into the hat here. Having been the longest member on this board, we've been doing business that way for a long time. To suddenly change so we can avoid the Brown Act provisions, I think that we would be really criticized by the public, that if we have not been posting, and we do post some of the meetings, but if we haven't been posting all the meetings, then that should be our way to show the public the trust that we want them to have in us, that you post something on the door, on the window, you notify, so people know that there's a meeting, and we do it on a lot of things. Then they're not going to come to the meeting, because most people don't want to come to those boring meetings. But at least we're showing that we are complying with the Brown Act, rather than finding the loophole to say, okay, obviously we haven't been doing it right, so now we're going to do it this way. I'm just saying, I just see that, and I think I know our public really well, and that's the first thing that they will imply or feel. So I like to see us look at what we're supposed to do, continue what we're doing, but do it the right way, and don't find a loophole so that we don't have to do something. That's just my opinion.
That's entirely a matter of governance discretion of the board. My view on that as a lawyer is that what the legislature has allowed, it has blessed. So I don't see this exception as being a loophole, though I probably, if we play back the tape, will be the first person to have used that word in this room. But I was intending to characterize it as an exception that must have had, in the legislature's wisdom, a reason. So if you choose to rely on it because you think that there are good reasons to rely on it, it's not like there's anything sinister about that. And there could be good reasons why honestly, in my experience working with school boards, it's not so much that there's an interest in excluding the public. It's the flexibility of having to do exactly the things that you said in your agenda that you posted 72 hours before. That's really the issue, is that sometimes if somebody says, I can't be there at 4, can we move it to 6? That's easy to do if you didn't need to post an agenda. But if you did, you're going forward at 4, or you're not going forward at all, and then that means you've got to repost and wait another 24 hours.
Right.
That's essentially, it's a practical problem for holding the meeting rather than a desire to exclude the public.
And I
there
would
are
say
many-
most our committees establish the date and time of their meetings, and it's a continuous basis. So I think that's
What
either here
meetings
or
are you
there.
talking about?
Hello?
I don't know any regular meetings that we have outside of our board
Well,
meetings.
maybe you don't have them, but other people do.
What subcommittee meetings do we have that are regular?
No, I didn't say subcommittee.
Well, I don't know what you're talking
With
about then.
things like, for years, they didn't post the school site council meetings? And is that correct? That we're supposed to do that? They're supposed to post it?
The rules for school site councils are in the ed code, and I'd be happy to advise the superintendent about the best way to comply with that. Really, the latitude for school site councils that exists for them, that doesn't exist for you, is that they can talk offline, and you can't.
Right, but they still have to post their meetings.
I believe they have to hold their meetings in a public place, usually at the school
And
site.
have minutes?
And I believe they have to have minutes
Yeah,
and an
no,
agenda.
I'm really aware of that.
I don't offhand, because I don't frequently get involved in the school site council compliance issues. I can advise the superintendent.
But there
about
was a time when they weren't all
Well,
complying to
I
that.
think that what would help me is that if we keep this limited to our board and, like the gentleman said, what we're going to do going forward. And I don't think it's fair when we start asking him what we're doing wrong if we violate it. I think what's more important is we know now that there's two types of committees that may be formed. One is ad hoc, which to me is the more advantageous. We have one right now for budget, fund development, and now I understand exactly why we set it up the way that we did, and I understand the wisdom of it. And I think it's not wise for us to start asking, especially in a public meeting, if we're violating laws. That's just what I feel. And
Oh, dear.
and the other thing is that it's our decision if we want to create committees or not. So I would feel more comfortable just getting the information, knowing how to conduct the committees, and then we're going to have to talk about that probably at another time, because just because the committees have been set up every year and we've done business like that for years doesn't make it right. Doesn't mean we have to keep doing it.
I think we're also here to listen and to learn, and we have new board members that need to ask the questions. So if we do have questions, I think we need to be patient with each person.
Well, I actually do have one other puzzlement, because we have one ad hoc, or I guess committee, that doesn't actually meet, which it would be the board policies. You know, we tell off 2 members of the board to read those policies that are coming due in each school year for revision. We don't meet. You know, we just
Explain
read
meeting.
them.
Well,
So I don't know what you do with a committee that doesn't actually meet.
Yeah, then you're not violating the Brown Act because you're not relying upon it. If you're not actually having a meeting, there's no problem with having a committee that doesn't meet. I suspect there are a lot of those in a lot of school districts, frankly. And if somebody were to do an inventory of all the various groups, that many of them will not have met in a long time.
And meeting doesn't have to be meeting in person. It could be on the telephone, over the internet, all kinds of ways. So we have to be
Yeah, well, that's what I'm
careful.
trying to figure out if,
Which is an excellent segue
get
into
into
my
that.
second topic,
Yes.
which is what is a meeting?
But
Yes,
before we
thank
go
you.
that, I kind of want to, what was the spark of the dialogue was, going back to that original question about how you went over, you know, it would be advantageous top-down or bottom-up, and I got all confused in that. And before we went into different derivatives, like I said, can you rephrase that in a nutshell? Because, I mean, there were
Okay.
so many moving parts there.
Yeah, that was important too.
Yeah.
This is a way of thinking about it. If the group is acting at the direction and with the appointment of the board, it is more likely that they will need to post an agenda and invite the public. If it is a group of people